Well, it's D-Day, the much talked about Remembrance Day, and you saw the wreath laying and, of course, the march past parade there at the Federal Capital Territory, where Mr. President and his vice were there to honor, no doubt, the fallen heroes and indeed young men and women who are laying their lives daily for the protection of the territorial integrity of our dear country. Well, we've been rocking this emblem for a while now, and January 15 is here. Remember that it usually used to be celebrated on the 11th of November to correspond rather with the role the Nigerian Army played. And indeed, some Nigerians in the World War I and World War II, but it was later shifted to January 15 to correspond precisely with the final day of the Civil War, which ended January 15, 1970. I'm joined by public affairs analyst Chijioke Eze. Our correspondent, defense correspondent in Abuja, is also standing by to bring us up to speed with what is happening there in the Federal Capital Territory. Good morning, and thank you for finding time to come.
Thank you, Nifemi.
So we're taking this day out to celebrate, indeed, turn attention precisely to the great work done by selfless Nigerians who are laying their lives out, down, rather. That's how we'll put it. How significant, really, for you is the Armed Forces Remembrance Day?
It's as significant as can be. First, I'm the son of a retired soldier. I went to a military school. I was raised by them, and they have all of my respect. And anybody who's come close to anything like a near-death experience, maybe an armed robbery attack or an accident, and then, you know, fears that loss, that's likely loss at that moment, although it wouldn't happen. But when you come that close to it, and then you imagine that there are people who voluntarily put up their lives every day so that your life can be smoother, then you'll understand the magnitude of their sacrifice.
How prestigious do you think this effort is, from the way it used to be way back to this day when they say if a soldier slaps you, then you will agree that the policeman is your friend? Do you think that young Nigerians, there are a lot of unemployment that is being recorded now. Do you think there are still young Nigerians who are passionate, who are willing, and who are looking forward to wear that uniform?
Well, truth is, there will always be those who don't find any value in it. But I assure you that there are more and more people. The way you have lawyers who raise their children to become lawyers, you have military-oriented families where the father is in the army, the mother is either in the army or in some other paramilitary, or maybe the Navy, the Air Force. You have such families. And then you also have people who, by virtue of their exposure, academic exposure, who fall in love with it. The same way somebody goes to a Catholic school and wants to become a Catholic priest, or goes to an Islamic school and then wants to pursue the religious line in Islam. That's how it is. So there will always be such cases. But for the prestige, I think with every passing day, because of the difficulties now, back in the day, it was maybe the worst thing was the war. But since the agitation in the South and now the one in the Northeast, it's anybody who wakes up in the morning and decides to go and join any of the arms of the military certainly deserves more than prestige. They deserve honor.
Let's turn our attention very quickly to Abuja, where our defense correspondent, Sifun Sen, is standing by. Sifun, help us with a recap of what transpired earlier, what the situation is right now in the Federal Capital Territory.
Well, we've seen the peak of the ceremony, which is the wreath laying by Mr. President, and the 21 gun volleys in honor of the veterans and particularly their colleagues who paid the supreme price with their lives. Outside the National Arcade, where the event is actually happening, there's a security cordon, 3 layers actually, the outer, the inner, and the one close to the National Arcade. My colleague Femi Akonde is actually inside the National Arcade as we speak. But the situation outside the arcade is such that security has been tightened, restriction of movement to the National Arcade, diversion of traffic along these routes just to allow the event continue as planned. But inside there, what we'll be expecting any moment from now, I gather, is the release of pigeon, which signifies peace. You know, that the country is at peace with itself, even though currently, as we understand, the military and the other security forces are currently prosecuting the war against insurgency in the northeast.
Absolutely, we have pictures of that, Stephen, right now, and I believe that that is exactly what will happen shortly. A lot of series of events that have taken place prior to this time, leading us to January 15, the big day. Did you at any point interact with the veterans, and did they tell you precisely how they feel with government and indeed with themselves at sort of time last days?
At several points, I've interacted with veterans, now described as living legends, those who paid huge price in the course of their duties as military men when they served for the country to remain as one indivisible entity. And what they keep saying is the need to give premium to their welfare. They said nothing or no assistance given to the welfare or attention given to the welfare of the veterans can be too much. Basically, they're looking for housing, feeding, and the basic needs, basically. Many of them, of course, are receiving their pensions, but they want a review of that. But federal government, through the vice president, in the church service that held on Sunday, reaffirmed the government's position, commitment to ensuring these veterans are given the attention that they require. But he also mentioned that that will depend on the budgetary provisions available to ensure that happens. Basically, welfare, welfare, and welfare. We've all gotten the opportunity to also speak with widows, those that they are breadwinners, talking about the service personnel left behind, haven't paid the supreme price. The same thing they are asking for. Give a lot more attention to their welfare.
Hey, so let's quickly talk about the soldiers fighting the big one, talking about the ongoing insurgency in northeast Nigeria. We're told, we're made to believe that Nigeria has been defended on the back of these individuals with their blood and their sweat involved. What updates do we have about their welfare, which appears to have been an issue of concern in recent past?
Well, the information we have and which we've reported time and again is that compared to maybe 2 years before now, there's been a marginal improvement in their welfare. A good number of them received their allowances as it went due to enable them prosecute the war against insurgency in the northeast. But like many of the soldiers we've spoken to will tell you that equipment. They've gotten lots of equipment, to prosecute this war, but of course, wear and tear sets in. So many of those equipments would need to be replaced or upgraded. But so far, so good. They are, putting their hearts to it, paying with their lives. A number of the times, we've also reported cases of several soldiers of the armed forces who lost their life in the bid to carry out their assignments in the northeast. But basically, what the soldiers are saying is, give us as much as we would require, and the sky would be their limit.
Yeah, the president had mentioned about revamping the military pension board and talking about upgrading the regular periodic verification exercise to ensure that the pensions and the remuneration for veterans get to them as at when due. What is the body language of government this year, or what precise promises are they making at this time? Sifa?
Well, basically what the government is saying is the military pensions board time and again has witnessed some reviews and changes to ensure it meets with the contemporary demands for soldiering across the board, talking about whether in the Army, the Navy, the Air Force. But one or two issues we've also been able to report, but it's a lot better than what it used to be. But looking at the economic indices, many of the soldiers are also asking for that to also be captured when their payments are being made through the military pensions board. They want it quicker, they want it more, they want it promptly and getting to them regardless of the channels through which it has to pass through to get to them at this moment. But as the president has spoken, what we'll be looking out for is how we'll match action with words.
We'll be back with you to feature your interview with some veterans and stakeholders, as well as looking forward to speak with Femi Akonde, who appears to be where the action is taking place right now. Defense correspondent Stephen Ese is live for us from the Federal Capital Territory. Let's get back to the studio. There's a lot of talks about what has transpired 50 years after the Civil War, because right now the Armed Forces Remembrance Day is now being marked on January 15, which signifies what they talk about is the victory of the federal troops and how we've been able to preserve the unity of Nigeria. But there are a lot of questions as regards whether we've learnt the lessons. Prior to 1967, it's been tussle of who occupies, the leadership position. There were some coup d'etat that led to the Civil War. How much improvement would you say that we've recorded as a country in that light?
We haven't recorded much improvement. Even though this is the longest transition we've had from the military to the civilian rule. And the second, as it were, because after the independence, there was we call it the Third Republic, I think, but then there was the forcible transition from civilian to military rule, and then the 1979 transition, and then we fell back to the military, and now we're here. There's scarcely been a significant improvement. First, let me praise the military. The bulk of the things that we call improvements in Nigeria were done by the military. The highways were done by the military. The, education system. We just translated some of those decrees into the Constitution. For the lessons learned, I don't think so, because sadly, power still terribly intoxicates in this country. For a democratic process, you shouldn't have people who are drenched in power. It's public power, but it's wielded as though it's a personal power. And the way it's also applied to life, basically, in Nigeria, it shows that we haven't really learned much. On the civil side of things, there is open, brazen disrespect for the police and palpable fear of the military, whereas it's supposed to be the other way. It's not to say that you should disrespect the military, but the police are the ones who you should truly fear. And then the military should essentially be reserved for such times when military exercises are necessary, because their work is really at the border. But that hasn't still been done. And you still have, conflicts between the police and various arms of the armed forces.
So, recall that after the Civil War, where millions of people were killed and maimed, there was this rehabilitation, reintegration, but there were about 3 hours on the part of government to help the Southeast get back on its feet after that particular incident. 50 years after, I'm amazed that people are still saying that not much has been done in that light. But one would have think that in 5 decades, that region should have moved on, developed on its own pace, and then by now we should be looking forward. What are your thoughts?
Truth is, I didn't see the Civil War, but I'll be telling a humongous lie if I say that the France had was the air drop-offs of food. So we can't, honestly, I can write about the tension in Iraq today. Sitting in Nigeria, I'll go on the internet, fetch all kinds of data, and write about it from the comfort of my ignorance of what's going on in Iraq. But when the man in Iraq is speaking, he's not speaking out of ignorance. He may not know what the political or military shenanigans may be where the decisions are made, but the bombs are dropping on his head, the mines are going off under his feet. I would think that that's the person in the best position to speak about the truth of the suffering that went on at that time.
And I'm just hoping that Nigeria as a country would have the privilege of holding on to these individuals who actually witnessed for themselves what transpired. There's a book, There Was a Country by Chinua Achebe.
Oh, yes.
There's also
The
a story
Tragedies of
like
War.
Expression of What Transpired by the young female who now stays in America. I can't recall her name now.
Is it Chimamanda?
Adichie.
Yes.
And then we're going to take a break now. When we return, we'll focus more on the gory tales of the Civil War, as well as what Nigeria has learned as a country. Stay with us. It's Armed Forces Remembrance Day. Attention is turned to the unknown soldier and the selfless contribution that Nigerian soldiers are making for the protection of the Nigerian state. We spoke earlier with our defense correspondent, Sifan Esen, in Abuja. We're looking forward to also feature some veterans as well as stakeholders in the course of the program. Chijioke Eze is here with me in the studio, and we saw some very terrible pictures earlier. Some would say that did not even scratch the reality of what transpired between 1967 and 1970. I am concerned about, over the period of the years that we are aware, there have been, drums of war. People who would say, oh, come on, let us pull out, let us do this. In fact,
If violence could have gotten you what you wanted, Sudan would not be in its position. After 23 years of civil war, then you get what you call your independence and you're back into that war. Because certain things can be negotiated. And more importantly, I do not see any part of Nigeria as superior to the other, irrespective of where you come from, whether you're from what we call minority, which in my opinion is very derogatory and disrespectful to the people who come from there, to those who claim that they have the majority of the population. Here is what I would say. When two people who are supposedly mates have a dispute, I consider it cowardice for one party to say, oh, I've left it for you and I've left it for God. No. There will always be dialogue. No, this thing that you're doing or what you're agitating for doesn't belong to you. The conversations will start, and as long as those conversations continue to hold, especially where the rules of engagement have been set, we will at some point arrive at tenable agreements and
how
abide by those
feasible
agreements.
and how effective, have these conversations been? Remember that in 2014 we had a national confab,
Correct.
and not all of the stakeholders agreed to that gathering in the first place. And there were people who were saying that whatever happened here is not going to hold water, and that's exactly what happened thereafter. But until recently, before IPOB was proscribed, the issue of renewed agitation championed by the self-acclaimed Biafra leader, who is now on exile, was a front burning issue in this part of the world. Let's begin to identify if indeed pulling out of Nigeria is an issue that can be discussed without some palpable fear of the violent potential of that move.
The truth is, the people leading the conversations are the ones who ultimately will determine the violence. Prior to the war, there was the Aburi Accord. It's not as if the Biafra war started because somebody woke up and said, no, I'm not open to peace. There was the Aburi Accord. It was because the leadership at the time could not consistently maintain the accord and stick to the ethos of it. And there were constant deviations from it, and that's what caused the Declaration of Independence. It wasn't an arbitrary action. So set that aside or keep it somewhere. Go on to today's conversation. I'm sure that it's not everybody in the Southeast who stands, even though they live in the Southeast, that stands with, IPOB. Some people are found in that madness and have no choice but to appear to identify with. Because I'm sure those who saw the war have come out to say, no, no more war. Even Dean Odumegwu Ojukwu himself, in an interview, I think it was with BBC, yes.
Exactly.
Said to the world that if it's for war as a solution to Biafra, no more. So if the people who prosecuted the war themselves have come to debunk it, I don't think that it's a viable option.
We'll get back to state where Okorafo is standing by. Good morning, Okorafo.
Good morning, Mr. Newton. Good morning, our guests in the studio.
Good morning.
Today marks a fruitful day to people that witnessed the Civil War. What do I mean by Civil War? Civil War that turned the whole system upside down. Today in Nigeria, Remembrance Day has turned to fun fair show, which is not supposed to be like that. I say no to war and I say no to crisis. Now, the Nigerian government, that is what I mean by Nigerian government, people that worked for this country, they dropped their last blood. Many of them, their families are suffering. Some of them, their children cannot go to school because of non-payment of their school fees by their parents. That I mean the stipend that goes. 50 years of civil war, people with bullets in their bone. Let me give you an example. I witnessed the civil war as I'm talking to all Nigerians. I'm talking to the whole world. That I was in primary school. My mother's their last born. In short, he has 3 bullets left in his bone up to 3. He has 7, but after removing the other 4, he refused that they will not cut off, in short, amputate his leg. He has up to 3 bullets inside his bone. He said nobody will cut off his leg. He will carry his leg like that till he goes to the grave. Now, such people that the government are supposed to cater for, at least today, nobody in the southeast will not say he doesn't know such people. If you go to Oji River, you see some of them there. Nobody's cared about them. Now, what do we do? That is, we're talking about remembrance. Do you know that after this the civil war, abandoned properties in Cross River, River State, and Akwa Ibom, Bayelsa, even at Enugu, nobody's talking about that. People that own such properties, nobody's cares about it. So it's a high time for the Nigerian government. I tell the Buhari administration, he tried. He said that when he said that those people that were involved in the Biafra were some of them, but some of them are still suffering. Honestly speaking, even the people that have problems that died in this Boko Haram nonsensical nonsense crisis that is going on in northern, just everywhere, both the kidnappers and I'm just prepared to the Nigerian government. Whether police or army, whether anything, security.
All right.
Government should visit their people at least. That how are you? It's very, very good.
I think you made a point, Okurafo. Thank you very much for your contributions. So, teaching history is critical, but it's also very sensitive. So the questions of who writes history comes to play, and how do we tell precisely what transpired without beginning to create some regional discontent, and then people begin to ask questions that why and how exactly did these things happen? How do you begin to react to that?
Okay, I'll react to it with something we all agree with, so we get to the point where we don't all agree with. How was slave trade taught in school? Was it not taught as a subject of history? Does it mean that those who learned about slave trade suddenly hate all the white people and the Arabs who were involved in transatlantic slavery? No. Today, you have people who live from within our countries in Africa to those countries where slave trade happened. Is there a civil war there? No. Is there an interracial war there? No. There is racism, and they're dealing with it the best way they know how. So, addressing history as a subject, as an academic subject, does not, in my opinion, constitute a national threat.
Let me hold you to take Emeka's call from Alaba. Good morning, Emeka.
Good morning, sir.
You're welcome to the show.
Yeah, my name is Emeka Johnson, calling from Alaba International.
Go ahead with the contribution, please.
Yes, I just watched the Armed Forces Remembrance Day a couple of minutes ago, and I saw what was unfold in that event.
Well, with you, Emeka, go ahead, please.
Yes, you see. Yes.
Well, you need to stop listening to your TV.
Yes,
just go ahead
please,
with the contribution.
Please. You see, we are talking of Armed Forces Remembrance Day. We should remember the fallen hero, or we should remember their family that have been neglected for years. I'm listening to you.
I'm afraid we can't make do with that. There's too much interruption in that call. I think he's not quite pleased with the way and manner the armed forces has been remembered.
He might also have broken down because his voice was cracking at the end.
But is there something else precisely that you think government isn't doing?
I think that anybody who wants to deal with a problem has to start with sincerity. If you sincerely pursue something, it's in the action it will show. It might take some time for the people to believe you because of the years of neglect and the years of mistrust and distrust. But as long as you have sincerity and there's consistency of action, eventually people will come to terms. Like the first caller had mentioned, he mentioned the place just next to mine, Oji River. They have, they have these places there where, like war monuments. You have the one in Abia State, you have the one in Imo State, you know. These were places that were no.
Quickly. Good morning, George.
Good morning, Ifemi.
You're welcome.
And greetings to the gentleman there.
Thank you, George.
Ifemi, the celebration of fallen heroes, in my view, is not in ceremony, as we are seeing in the pictures from Abuja. It is in the taking care of our fallen heroes, their families that they left behind. I've visited some barracks, Ifemi. When a soldier that goes to war dies, within a month or two, you see them drive their families away from the barracks. And in most cases, these families don't have anything to fall back upon. And the women are left with looking for money from nowhere to train the children. I do not know whether it is out of place for a soldier that is going to the war front to be insured that if anything happens while you are in the war front, so amount of insurance money will be paid to your family. Such things, such incentives are they're abundant in countries that we try to emulate. That's why in UK, for example, every family is proud to have a person in the police or in the armed forces because they know how the government takes care of them if anything happens and how the society, in general, are proud of them. So if I were the government, what we should be doing is to do things that will encourage people to sacrifice their lives for this country. But as things stand now, it is not, I'm sorry to say, it is not so. And we have to do something about it. That is just the truth of the matter.
All right, I think you made your point, George.
If you don't mind, sir.
Yes.
The video clip of the Civil War that you showed, I hope somebody will show it to Nnamdi Kanu. I don't think it was done at that time. So that he will know what war is about. He can't sit in London there and be instigating war.
I think you made your point, George. Thank you very much for your contribution. And he is advocating an upgrade in the welfare package for the soldiers. And some would say that that is no doubt in order. It would even inspire younger ones who want to defend their country. Because on one hand, is that individual who is fighting the war. But he also have people who depend on him for provision. What steps do you think government can begin to take in this light?
Well, the first thing, in my opinion, is while they're alive, you need to take better care of them. As he mentioned, I've been around 1,000 barracks in Nigeria and outside Nigeria. I have seen the conditions that some of these people live in. It's let's not go into how bad they are, but in black and white English, those places are inhabitable. So that's one. Two, I like his advice on the insurance, which is really key. The soldiers, in fact, not just the military, I think anybody who is in the security forces should have life insurance because anything can happen at any time. And because it's your duty to protect and to serve, you can be called on. So once you're coming into the Army, the police, the Air Force, the Navy, Customs, as long as it's part of the security apparatus of this country, you should have life insurance.
I think Emeka has called back. Good morning, Emeka.
Good morning, sir.
Please go ahead with your contribution.
Yes, sir. Sorry, I was talking before I got interrupted.
All right.
You see, like the last caller just said, I'm going to be sincere with you. I'm also a soldier. And yes, you see this Armed Forces Remembrance Day that we are talking about. Every year we remember the fallen heroes, forgetting the fact that those they left behind are not being remembered. Like, for instance, you were sent to Maiduguri. Eventually, maybe something happened, you die along the line. After 3 months, you know what the army will do? The army will freeze your salary, thereby leaving the woman and children in a penury. Maybe after some time, the same army will now come and start pursuing that woman out of the barracks and she should leave without giving her anything. And today we are in Abuja saying we are celebrating our fallen heroes. What are we celebrating? What are we celebrating in Abuja?
Emeka, if I got you correctly, yes. Are you saying you are a soldier?
Yes, I am.
What would you tell us about the morale of the boys who are actually on the field right now?
My brother, let me be sincere with you. The morale of the force is as damn as nothing to write home about. Yes, it's as damn as nothing to write home about. I'm a soldier, and whatever I tell you now is the gospel truth. Whatever I tell you, being an experienced soldier, whatever I tell you now is the gospel truth. My elder brother also died in that Meduguri last year. And you can imagine after 3 months, they stopped the wife like a woman with 4 children. And today we say we are celebrating you. What has the army done for this family? 1,001 time. Okay, what is even bothering me most? Any woman that lost her husband back there, some senior officer will want to sleep with her before even processing her papers for payment. Where is
All
it
right.
done? Where is it done?
I think you made your point, Emeka. You also know that this is a telephone conversation and we can hardly confirm what Emeka is saying. But if that is true, it is a troubling development.
Well, it is absolutely troubling. Before we get to the one that may not be verifiable, let's talk about the ones that evidence can point to in 1,000 places where, because it's part of the military rule, when you retire, you leave the barracks. And of course, death is compulsory retirement. But I think what's more important is in what condition did that compulsory retirement happen? It's not as if the person committed a crime and was dismissed. We're talking about somebody who died serving the nation. And for clarity and emphasis, I would like to state that it is not only men who are in the military. It is not only men who go to war. Women go to war. Women die at war. But the number is far less than men who die at war. So let us also remember them, because it's not enough to talk about the men and not talk about the women.
Let me hold you very briefly to take Mrs. Okenefuna from Oshodi. Good morning. Good morning, ma'am. Are you there?
Good morning, Nifemi.
Yes, please go ahead. You have
Please,
just about 30
point
seconds.
of correction.
Yes.
Nigeria committed genocide in Asaba. They committed genocide in Asaba. They buried people alive in Asaba. Point of correction. 2 of my uncles died in that trap. They were buried alive in Asaba. And so long as the Nigerian government and the military does not call for peace commission in this country, I think we'll keep having problems. The military, they are still alive. Those who did that, they are still alive, who buried people in different places in Asaba. They tell them to dig their graves and they pour sands on them and they bury them alive. They should call for peace commission in this country so that there will be peace. So long as they don't do that, I think it will be very, very difficult for some people like us to forget the past.
All right, I think you made your point.
Even the past, but to
Thank you
forget
very
is
much
very
for calling on the program. 50 years after Peace Commission for, according to her, crimes that were committed during the war. How realistic do you think this will be?
It is absolutely realistic. When was Israel displaced? And when were they resettled? No crime is too old to apologize for. There are crimes that it was the grandchildren who apologized to the grandchildren of the victims. Nothing. I said it 1,000 times in private conversations, in public discourse. If you truly want to address the issue, the first ingredient is sincerity. Where you apologize for crimes, even when Pope John Paul II apologized for certain crimes of the Catholic Church. I am Catholic. When was it? When did those things happen? In the 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th century, France, Spain, Portugal, across Europe. Pope John Paul openly apologized. Would you say because the people who were victims, suddenly history should be discarded?
I remember there was a U.S. Presidential candidate who led a campaign for white Americans to apologize to their black fellows for the crimes committed during the slave trade. Let's take our last call this morning. Reverend Dominic has called in. Good morning, Reverend.
Good morning, Femi. How are you?
Terrific.
Please, Femi, I would like you to stop replaying that thing. It's so emotional to me. I'm 55 years today. You can see I am 5 years old when the Civil War was going on. Let me give you a picture nobody will play anywhere in the world. We were somewhere in Awaza, in River State, me and my family, because we were in a makeshift camp. And National Army is, approaching that camp. And my mother was holding my mouth not to cry, and other women. Do you know the people in that camp forced a woman to kill her daughter in my face so that they will stop crying, so that they will not attract National Army? Where will you play that picture? That is horrible thing we go through. After the Civil War, there was the conciliation and the construction. The construction started in Lagos. That there was also the construction in Imo, Abia, Enugu, where the bombs were dropped. So the injustice is going on. Please stop playing that film so we don't become more emotional. And number two, we must play this film in secret to people, IPOP, who are fighting the emblem of war. No matter how terrible Nigeria becomes, we should not go that road any longer. If we witness what I witnessed, for a mother to kill her own daughter, because
that's
of
how much time can permit us to take now. Thank you for your contribution, Reverend Dominic. Reconciliation, rehabilitation, reconstruction. We have to go now. What way forward 50 years after?
A simple way forward, in my opinion, is to approach it with sincerity. If you do not, you can't dance around the subject. If there's a man with a bullet wound on his leg, you can't approach him with Coca-Cola, and say, hey, have a drink, pending maybe when you have that drink, you can heal the wound. No. You go to him with the simple apparatus of either taking out the bullet, treating the wound, and then ensuring post-medical care. Simple. We cannot dance around these subjects. Nigeria has too many issues that do not necessarily require monies.
We have to go now, Chijioke. I must thank you very sincerely for finding time to come. And be sure that we'll find some more time to discuss these issues. It's 2020, and from the conversation we've had, it's obvious that the wounds between 1967 and 1970 is still very fresh, and we're hopeful that government is paying attention. We must also say that the contributions, the submissions of our callers and our guests has nothing to do with the opinions of TVC News. A big thank you to you for finding time to join us. We'll be back tomorrow for another exciting one. We're also counting down to Uncle Yori's return. I am Nifemi Oguntoye. God bless Nigeria.